To start from scratch, use Mrs. L sourdough starter flakes. If you follow the instructions one day at a time, these are the results you should get. By day 3, you should be looking at good bubbles. Following the recipe, you can have everything measured out ahead of time. Keep in mind, I'm making 3 times the amount you would with the recipe. I've got my levain built up to the size I need. I'm scooping it out and putting it into the flour that I've pre-measured and the water that I've pre-measured. That should be at approximately 90 degrees. Once you've measured the exact amount that you need, you're going to mix this up, and you can do so by dipping your hand in water to keep it from sticking too much, or alternatively, you can use a spatula. Mix it up so that you don't have any dry spots. And then you are going to let this sit, and I like to mark where my starter begins so that later in the day I can see how lovely it has risen. This bubbly levain is just super satisfying. At 3 o'clock, you're going to make your autolyse. Autolyse is simply your flour and your water. You're putting these two together and you're mixing it by hand. The microbial elements from your hand actually create your own type of sourdough. And it might get a bit mucky, and that's completely to be expected. You can dip your hand in water and you just mix this together, and note that there aren't a lot of gluten threads. It's just tears apart very easily. Your autolyse has been sitting for approximately 20 minutes. And now I'm adding a tiny bit of yeast, which helps boost these loaves as they sit in the fridge overnight. And I've pre-measured some pumpkin seeds and sunflower seeds. Keep in mind, I'm making 3 times the amount your recipe is showing. And I've pre-measured my salt, and I'm sprinkling that in as well. And then I'm taking my levain and I'm adding that to the mix. And we start to incorporate. So you're folding over and mixing it in, and you can tell that there's just a little bit more gluten in here now that it's just been sitting for those 20 minutes. It's quite a different dough and does not stick to your hands so much. And once I've folded over a few times, I do what's called the pinching method, and I'm going to wet both my hands, and I'm going to pinch these ingredients all together to try and help incorporate them. And I'm going to do that pinching and folding, alternating about 3 times before I allow this dough to rest again for approximately 20 minutes. I'll just speed up the video a bit so you can at least see the process, but not have to watch for so long. I don't actually work that fast. Sourdough is not a fast process. That is the thing to keep in mind, but keep to your weights, your temperatures, and your time, and you should have success. Once you're comfortable with the process, start playing around with your flavors. Here's some fenugreek, some dried herbs are a good thing to add because they don't change the consistency of your dough. Here's some wheat berries that I took 3 days to sprout, and my husband's favorite, raisin bread, which adds some sweetness to your sourdough. Sourdough is a process, not so much a flavor, but for those who have some adverse feelings about the sour in sourdough, certainly raisin bread is a nice alternative. So it's 4 o'clock and I'm doing my first stretch and folds. And so we're gonna stretch and fold this approximately 8 to 10 times until you feel resistance from your dough that it doesn't want to stretch anymore, and you're trying not to tear it. So listen to your dough. Feel free to dip your fingers, your hands into the water, and just keep on doing your stretch and fold. And you're going to do this process about every 20 minutes. You just want to extend it over about an hour and a half of time before you leave it for its final rest. So approximately every 20 minutes, whatever works for your time schedule, and you're doing it 3 times. Another satisfying aspect, seeing that window in your dough when you can just sort of see through the dough, but it isn't tearing. Okay, it's time to shape your loaves. It's 8 o'clock in the evening. I use a little bit of flour on my dough in that line to make the cut a little easier so my dough scraper does not stick to the dough. And I'm making nice sharp cuts, trying to be very decisive, but sometimes I'm a little short, so I add a little bit more. And this is my rising system. I've made linen cloths and found some dollar store baskets, and my dough does not stick to these linen cloths. And now I'm shaping the dough. I've got a couple of examples here of how I do it. This is a fairly loose skin on this one because I just find it works for the pumpkin sun. And you're doing the stretching and folding and then rolling it together, and a little bit of tension on the table, pulling it towards me, getting my hands a bit floured if I need to so it doesn't stick. And here's another example, doing it in a bit of slow motion for you so you can see how much it's stretching, and note that the dough is not tearing at all. No water being used at this point. Don't wet your hands. If you need the dough to not stick to your hands, just rub your hands in a little bit of flour, but don't put excess flour on your dough because that flour will create bigger holes in your final product. Bread is covered with a bag and put in the fridge for the night, and we'll see it in the morning. Oven has been heating at 500 degrees, and follow the schedule for how I actually bake the bread. I'm just doing a little fancy scoring here with a lovely tool with a razor blade in it that gives some fine cuts. Don't actually work this fast, but you get the point. And then I'm going to use an X-Acto knife to make a venting slash for my bread. X-Acto knife is great. You can change your blade. It's inexpensive. It's been a great tool for me. Here's my clutch system because I cannot have 9 Dutch ovens to bake my bread. I do 9 at a time in my oven. Eye screws, dollar store pots, and some washers. And there you have it, the finished loaf with a nice little ear on it, that pokey part. And that's a satisfying loaf. I hope you are extremely successful with using my recipe and my methods. Be creative, have fun, don't get discouraged. Keep in mind that time and temperature are 2 of your most important ingredients. And most of all, just have fun. We'd love to meet you. Come to the Comox Valley Farmers Market to meet us at Alderlane Farmhouse Bakery and stop and say hello. All the best. Happy baking.